It always cracks me up when I hear people say they love games that are NES hard. I know what they're trying to say. It harkens back to an era of brutal difficulty and actually puts your skills to the test. None of this hand-holding stuff we have today. But the thing is, like, have you sat down and played NES games lately? They kinda suck. Welcome to another Bad Game Design. Let's talk about it, but first, an important announcement. Thanks to Squarespace sponsoring today's video, I'm officially launching the Snowman Gaming website. Stick around till the end for details on how you helped in designing it. And if you're interested in building a site or domain for yourself, you can go to squarespace.com/snowman and use the offer code SNOWMAN to get 10% off your first purchase. Alright, let's dive in. Right off the bat, I feel like 50% of you are thinking, now hold on there, Buster Bacon Buns. There are some good NES games. What about the Castlevanias and Ninja Gaidans? And yes, absolutely. In fact, I'm gonna talk about them, so don't steal my thunder, okay? But the other 50% are thinking, yeah, of course these games are bad. They're over 30 years old. Game design wasn't even really a thing yet. Why would you expect them to be on the same level as masterpieces today, like Fortnite? And this is very true, so let me state my thesis up front. I want to analyze exactly where NES games and others from that era fail and how they could improve, so that we can implement better principles in titles today, but while still retaining the good aspects that people seem to look back on so fondly. There's a reason some gamers are yearning for the good old days, and while we are really good at putting on rose-tinted glasses to block out the negatives, there certainly was some sort of magic to them, otherwise they wouldn't be held in such high regard. Well, let's break this down a little bit. First, we'll discuss the good and the bad of NES games in their heyday, and then we'll talk about how games in the modern era are nailing homage, while also advancing the formula we hold so dear. So, what's the big deal with NES games? Well, at their worst, they essentially replicate the arcade experience in your home, which was designed to be overly difficult on purpose in an effort to steal your quarters. But now, since no money is involved, the only thing it wastes is your time. Oh, you ran out of lives. Sorry, guess you gotta start the whole game over now. Lives are the bane of my existence. Their sole purpose is to push back your progress as punishment for losing them. And I think this is the main reason people say that NES games were so hard. But this, my friends, is what we call artificial difficulty. It's not hard because it tests your skill to get past a certain hurdle. It's hard because it removes your resources so that you can't attempt the hurdle as often as you'd like. Instead, you have to execute a perfect run of a level to even get back and try your hand at the obstacle that took you down. There's a reason things like the Konami code giving a ton of extra lives came into existence. If developers needed it for testing, how could they expect regular players to get through it unscathed? Now, you could make the argument that as a kid you had more time on your hands, so replaying the same levels over and over wasn't as brutal as it is now for adults, since our time is more precious and we have to schedule out our commitments. But you know the old adage my grandma used to say, a lot of time to waste does not a good game design make. Inherently, it's less fun to go through the same section you've already beaten countless times before. Of course, you get better with each attempt and can complete it faster or without losing as many lives, but when you fill your later levels with insane reflex challenges and cheap deaths, or wear down the player without any respite, it piles a walk of shame on top of your failure, making you go back through the easy peasy levels you've already conquered so many times. When you reach a certain checkpoint, knowing there won't be any way your progress will be reset, it makes that checkpoint so much more rewarding, like a bonfire in Dark Souls. This is your new starting place. It builds on your previous accomplishments and just adds more. No one step forward, two steps back nonsense. Conversely, checkpoints can also feel meaningless if they're too close together or there isn't any punishment for death. A lot of modern games suffer from this, by simply not challenging the player and becoming boring in a different way. So it's a fine balance, but I do like to think that saving progress is better than losing it. To give an analogy from content creation, it would be like putting together a perfect video, and then losing all your footage and edits due to a power outage with no backups. I may lose my motivation and not even bother starting the same video again. I've been watching my wife play the new Spyro remakes, which are some of the few games she ever played as a kid, and cracking up at her worry of starting the whole game over if she dies at 0 lives. Because I have to keep telling her, games don't really do that anymore. And I know without a doubt that if it did reboot her at the beginning with no collectibles, she would have quit and never come back. Now, some games fix this issue by having a game over only set you back to the start of the stage, instead of the entire game. There's still some punishment because you lose your checkpoints of the current level, but you don't have to start from scratch, which at the very least saves time, and lets your accomplishments still be worth something. Some games also utilize a password system, which is definitely a step in the right direction. I beat Super Mario Bros. 3 for the first time on stream the other night, and man, it was super rewarding. I warped straight to World 8, and yeah, it was hard, but still felt beatable. I remember thinking there's no way you would see stages like these in Mario games today. It really puts your skills to the test. That Bowser fight was top-notch, but they also did a decent job of balancing punishment and leniency. Upon a game over, you start at the beginning of the world, but any airships or tanks are destroyed for good, so you don't have to play those levels again. And while you can randomly get sucked into the abyss by these omniscient hands, they actually are more helpful than harmful, since the stages are very short and reward you with a valuable leaf power-up. The only parts you'd have to play again after restarting are level 1 and 2, but after completing the fortress, it sets a new permanent checkpoint leading straight toward Bowser's castle. But even then, I found myself using save states after finishing certain stages, because in the interest of time, I didn't want to keep playing the same challenges I had already overcome. I probably would have stopped before finishing if I had to keep fighting through level 1 and 2 so many times. Not out of lack of ability, but boredom or annoyance. I think this is why most virtual consoles have a save state function built in nowadays. But there's more at work here causing such frustrating experiences. If purely restarting from further back was the issue, games like Bloodborne would not be as popular as they are. I think it comes down to enemy placement and level layouts. Developers used to be a lot more carefree with incorporating random elements into their games than they are now. Look at how the zombies pop up out of the ground in Ghosts and Goblins. It's like, hey, sorry you got hit, that's the nature of the game, baby. Sometimes they'll randomly chomp your legs off. So many NES games feel like gauntlets just littered with enemies. No rhyme or reason to their placement. Telegraphing incoming danger is so vital to how a player feels when encountering obstacles. It's the difference between feeling clever and like you read the enemy's mind, and feeling blindsided, like you were cheated out of a life. Now, without a doubt, limited technology affected how much animation an enemy could show before attacking, but the level design often doesn't help the situation either. Bottomless pits and one-hit KOs are all over 8-bit titles, and most of the time they're combined with annoying enemies to make it even harder to avoid your demise. Add in faulty physics or committed jump arcs, and sometimes your strategy feels more like luck than actual planning. Everything else can be just right, but if you don't feel confident in your knowledge of how to tackle a barrier, it can ruin the entire experience. And finally, this is less of a big deal, but visually speaking, NES games look old and gross. And what is that supposed to be? It's pretty hilarious when you realize games used to just release with this little polish. Glitching pixels and tons of lag were par for the course. Bethesda ain't got nothing on this. Obviously, games have come a long way since then, and creators had to work with the tech of the time. But this is why the best games that pay homage to the classics don't exactly play by the rules, and others that do use the same hardware look like 30-year-old games. Let's look at Shovel Knight, perhaps the prime example of what a tribute to the NES era should look like. Yes, it's still 8-bit inspired pixel art, but they didn't limit themselves to tiny color palettes, and utilizing a 16:9 aspect ratio allows them to show so much more on screen. I actually think that's a big difference from old games that's overlooked. It was harder to see what was coming because of the lack of widescreen. But Shovel Knight does so much more than look pretty. It perfectly shows us that you can still have a challenging adventure while also feeling fair. Enemies will always give you enough time to react to their behavior, and often are introduced in a safe environment the first time you see them. Telegraphs are aplenty, especially for the big baddies and bosses, though obstacles are the same way. There's almost never a time where you'll be caught off guard or killed cheaply as long as you're paying attention. See, while there are flying Medusa heads here too, they don't appear if you're close enough to the edge of the screen. Great safety buffer. And while nasty one-hit KO spikes are bountiful, there's forgiving invincibility frames. So even if you accidentally fall, you have enough time to recover, and even skip past a few obstacles if you're handy. Cycles match up pretty well too, so you can sail through a stage at a normal pace and be fine. And if you do mess up in vertically focused levels, most of the time you'll fall back down to safety and be able to try again right away. Most importantly, you learn how items, objects, and enemies work before it builds in difficulty. The power-ups are tucked away in single-room puzzles, so you know how to use them before you exit, and it prepares you to do some super gratifying tricks later in the stage. The first time you see this puking statue, it lines up with the gaps perfectly, so you won't get frustrated trying to fit it through. You'll fall on snow or bounce on a dragon before you have any time to react, and in the process, learn a new mechanic without even realizing it. Seriously, a masterclass in teaching without teaching. But perhaps coolest of all is how Shovel Knight deals with death and checkpoints. Instead of lives and game overs restarting your progress, you simply lose some of your gold, which can be reclaimed if you make it back to where you previously failed. But if you die again, it's gone for good. A system many other titles have adopted in today's gaming climate. This encourages you to improve without causing a huge detriment to your progress. You only lose roughly 25% of your total money, and makes way more sense than arbitrary lives that serve little to no purpose. Now, there are several different checkpoints throughout a stage, and you have infinite attempts to beat each challenging section. But even better, you can break those checkpoints to gain an extra batch of treasure. But this causes you to restart at an earlier lantern if you die. This introduces an incredible amount of risk versus reward. Do I take more money and trust that I'll reach the next goal unscathed? Do I break every checkpoint and risk going back to the very beginning if I screw up? The reason this works so well is that the player chooses this increase in difficulty. Death is way more punishing, similar to NES games of years past, but you have to opt in to this adjustment, so you have no one to blame but yourself. Shovel Knight doesn't have a difficulty setting, but it builds one in naturally to the world by allowing this choice. And you're really only increasing the amount of time investment required to win. Each stage is still saved after completion no matter what. It's incredible. But so many other games have incorporated stuff like this to improve on the outdated philosophy from the 80s. The first good game design I ever did was on Volgarr the Viking, and how it utilized the isolation principle to teach you about its variety of enemies, and color-coded the strength of your foes, so you know how many hits they'll take and be able to plan out your strategy accordingly. While bosses are intimidating, they all have recognizable patterns, so you can learn and adapt every single fight. Nothing random or unpredictable here. It has pretty unforgiving checkpoints, but infinite lives to try again. And once you reach the next level, you'll always be able to warp right to it by walking left when you boot up a new game. But there also is reward for playing well. If you don't take damage and collect the Valkyrie orbs, you can try your hand at extra tough alternate stages in order to get the true ending. But this time you do have limited lives, so make every action count. Again, the player chooses this mode if they're ready for the challenge, and not by a simple menu option, but by playing the game in a different way. The End is Nigh, while not visually similar to NES games, does have huge influence from their difficulty. Much like Super Meat Boy, it's all about shorter increments of platforming, lowering the punishment for failure, but raising the overall brutality. But once you reach the first ending, it kicks things up a notch. Not only do you find yourself in much harder versions of the previous levels, but now you have a certain number of attempts based on how many tumors you've collected along the way. If you run out of tumors, you restart the current area, but you can also go back and explore the rest of the game to try and gather more tumors, which will increase the number of tries you have in the end game. You see, the player gets to adjust the amount of difficulty they want by how much they're willing to collect, from none to simply beat the normal game, to 450 of them to unlock a final insanely hard area called Nevermore. Oh, and if you really do want to relive the glory days, there are secret carts you can find to play 8-bit style levels, which are easily the hardest in the game due to their limited lives mechanic. As you might guess, I didn't bother completing them. So what have we learned today? Let's recap. Yes, there are good elements in NES games, mainly being able to challenge the player as long as the stages and enemy placement are well designed, and the punishment for death isn't too exhaustive. A game over doesn't have to mean starting from stage 1. You could allow the player to continue, or show a password to return to their furthest accomplishment. But it can go further than that in today's games. If lives don't make sense, try out a different penalty that may still sting, but not cause a player to rage quit in anger, such as a loss of currency, high score, or power-ups. Make your level designs purposeful, and allow the player to learn about an enemy, item, or obstacle before throwing them into the fray. Random elements are obviously allowed, but should be implemented with caution, and tested thoroughly to make sure unjustified deaths are non-existent.
And finally, if you want to really elevate the experience, offer an added final test that the player can opt into, at which point you can start throwing in nastier elements as long as you're sure they'll be skilled enough to handle it. At the end of the day, it's about making sure the player feels capable by providing a fair and clear challenge, then driving home the accomplishment by ensuring the player use their own wit and ability to overcome. You want to work with the player, not against them, to create as fun and meaningful of an experience as possible. Can you think of a modern game that wears the true essence of NES Hard on its sleeve? One that's difficult but not in a cheap or fabricated way. Or maybe there's another old school title I didn't mention that really does implement fair challenge and picks the player back up from their mistakes. Tell me about them in the comments below and let's talk about it. So the next time you hear of a game that claims to have the insanity of the NES days, make sure it has more to offer than frustratingly unavoidable obstacles and artificial difficulty curves. Although, I guess that's better than just saying everything is like Dark Souls. Thanks for watching another episode of Bad Game Design. I'll see you guys next time. Stay frosty, my friends.
Alright everyone, it's officially here, snowmangaming.com. Thanks to your input about what you'd like to see, I was able to put something together through Squarespace that I'm really proud of. The site building tools were extremely easy to use and practically did all the hard work for me. I was able to create beautiful layouts super quick and intuitively, and my favorite part was that it just worked from the get-go. No updates, installers, or add-ons needed. The options are super versatile, making it great for any type of website, musicians, artists, selling a product, you name it. So if you're in the market for a great site building tool, I can't recommend Squarespace enough. And if you go to squarespace.com/snowman and use the code snowman, you'll get 10% off your starting month. I'll see you next time. Bye!
This month's Patreon shoutout goes to Marcus Ebensteiner, whom I love with all my heart and I can't rhyme with Ebensteiner.